Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Before, during and after last year's EU referendum, we took time in the programme to answer listeners' questions. What will happen to pensioners living in the EU? How many people does the EU employ? As a European migrant, will I need to leave? That's just a sample. Over the months, we received thousands of questions like that, and with the help of the BBC's reality check team, our correspondents Chris Morris, Norman Smith and Kevin Connolly did their best to answer as many as possible. As far as we can tell, at no stage did we answer these questions. What happens if there's no deal between the UK and the EU? And what is the UK government plan for no deal? We're going to have a go tonight. What happens if there's no deal between the UK and the EU? Chris Morris is from the BBC's reality check team.
Thanks, Eddie. Yes, if negotiations break down irretrievably, why can't we simply walk away? Well, in theory, we can. We could repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, refuse to pay any financial settlement and, in effect, dare the rest of the EU to turn their backs on us. But the immediate effect of doing that, well, it's what businesses and others call the cliff edge, as in falling off the cliff edge, which is usually painful. In terms of the economy, tariffs would be imposed overnight on goods moving between the UK and the EU, 3 or 4% on many industrial parts, for example, but roughly 10% on car parts and up to 30 or even 40% on some farm produce. OK, you might say, but that would hurt them as well as us, surely. It would, yes, but they could still trade with each other without barriers and still take advantage of the EU's free trade deals around the world. We'd basically be starting from scratch. Of course, it's not just about tariffs on goods. Most of the UK economy is based on services, which would suddenly lose the unimpeded access they now have to the EU. But perhaps the biggest challenge of no deal is that many of the basic rules that govern so many aspects of our lives would cease to exist. So there'd be no customs arrangements, and to begin with, at least you have to presume that nothing would move. What would immigration policy be? Would EU citizens here and UK citizens there suddenly become illegal? Technically, that's possible. We'd also, overnight, cease to be members of a host of regulatory bodies that you've probably never heard of, but you'd certainly notice when they were gone. For example, if we suddenly left the European Aviation Safety Agency without any replacement, planes couldn't legally leave UK airspace for Europe, or even the United States, because we'd automatically leave the EU-US Open Skies Agreement as well, and it guarantees landing rights on both sides of the Atlantic. With no deal, we'd no longer be part of the European Chemicals Agency, which tests and authorises chemicals for safe use, or the European Medicines Agency, which does the same for drugs. We've heard a lot in the last few days about Euratom, the European nuclear regulator. Then there's the Maritime Safety Agency, the Banking Authority, the Food Safety Authority, the Plant Variety Office, the list goes on. Given time, we can set up our own independent versions of all of these if we want to, but we certainly can't do it overnight. So no deal would be a sudden, dramatic rupture. Would we recover? In time, yes, probably. Trade can't grind to a halt forever. And there are those who think it's worth it. UKIP put out a statement just today saying it's time to call it quits and walk away. But many people in politics and especially in business think no deal would be a disaster for our economy and for our standing in the world. Eddie.
Chris Morris. So no deal is something that would have consequences for us all. The next question is, what is the UK government's plan for no deal? Theresa May said during the campaign for the general election that she called that Brexit was the defining issue of that election. When she was questioned on Channel 4 and Sky News' May versus Corbyn Live, the battle for number 10, here's what she said.
No deal is better than a bad deal. We have to be prepared to walk out.
So you are prepared to walk away from the European Union with no deal?
No deal is better than a bad deal. And let me just tell you...
That wasn't exactly my question.
Yes,
my question was, are you prepared to walk away
by definition, if I'm prepared to say that no deal is better than a bad deal, I want to get a good deal from the European Union. What I don't want is the sort of bad deal that some people are talking about. If you think about it, some people in Europe are talking about punishing us, and that would be a bad deal for us. Some people here in the UK talk as if they're willing to do anything to sign up to a deal with the European Union, and that would be a bad deal for us as well.
So
we need to negotiate and negotiate hard.
to leave the European Union with no deal?
As I say, no deal would be better than a bad deal.
Theresa May talking to Jeremy Paxman. To be fair, whenever it's asked about the prospect of no deal, the British government says it's working hard in a positive fashion to achieve a deal. But that doesn't really answer the question. Given the possible consequences, which some people say might be terrible, it's fair to ask, what is the government's plan for no deal? The Secretary of State for Brexit, David Davis, was asked that very question on BBC One's Andrew Marr on the 12th of March.
We have been planning for the contingency, all the various outcomes, all the possible outcomes of the
including a proper plan for no deal?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
David Davis saying, oh, yes, the government was planning for there being no deal. 5 days after that, David Davis appeared before the Committee on Exiting the EU to be questioned by Labour's Hilary Benn.
Can you tell the committee whether the government has undertaken an economic assessment of the implications for the British economy and for British businesses of there being no deal?
Well, it made an estimate during the Leave campaign, or the sort of Leave, the referendum campaign, but I think one of the issues that's arisen is that those forecasts don't appear to have exactly been very robust since then.
Right, my question is...
Not since then. Not, the answer is, if you mean under my time, no.
David Davis saying that under him, the British government had not taken any assessment of the economic implications of no deal. 2 months after that, David Davis was quoted in the Daily Express saying, half his time at the Department for Exiting the EU is spent preparing for the possibility of the government walking away from Brexit talks without a deal. Confused? Step forward in the House of Commons yesterday, the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson.
There is no plan for no deal.
In response to that statement, Downing Street implied that planning was taking place for no deal. We have said it is right to plan for all eventualities and that planning is taking place across government. But Downing Street wouldn't comment on whether a plan for no deal already exists. Theresa May was not available for Prime Minister's questions today. Her place was taken by Damien Green, and standing in for Labour's Jeremy Corbyn was Emily Thornberry, who was also keen to know what the government would do in the event of there being no deal.
What does no deal actually mean for our businesses, for our people, and for issues such as the Irish land border? So, can the First Secretary address this question now? What does no deal look like in practice?
We are seeking a good deal for Britain that will enable us to trade as freely as possible with the European Union to protect our prosperity, at the same time as getting trade deals with other important markets around the world. In the last week alone, both the United States and Australia have said they would like to sign trade deals with Britain as fast as possible. So I'm happy to report to her that negotiations are going well and that her fear of no deal is probably overstated.
Damien Green not answering the question directly. So given the potential consequences, what is the government's position on planning for no deal with the EU? PM has spoken in the past month to someone with close knowledge of the work the Department for Leaving the European Union is doing. We were told the department has been doing detailed planning for leaving without a deal, and that's been going on for some considerable time. That, though, was an off-the-record conversation. Obviously, in response to the contradictory statements from the most senior figures in government, we wanted to get some on-the-record clarity for you. We were told the Brexit Secretary David Davis was not available to speak to us. So, in place of the interview we'd hoped to bring you, here are some old clips instead.
We have been planning for the contingency, all the various outcomes, all the possible outcomes of the
including a proper plan for no deal?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
There is no plan for no deal.
We have been planning for the contingency, all the various outcomes, all the possible outcomes of the
including a proper plan for no deal?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
There is no plan for no deal.
Inevitably, to Brexit, the government, in the shape of the Deputy Prime Minister in all but name, Damien Green, said today that it was likely we'll get a good deal with the EU and that the chances of there being no deal at all is probably overstated. But in tonight's Newsnight, David Cameron's former advisor, Julian Glover, urges them to get on with it.
Dear Theresa, do a deal. Did you mean it when you said it? Your claim that no deal is better than a bad deal on Brexit. Tell me you didn't mean it. Tell me it was swagger, as if we were bidding for an old banger in a used car lot. But when you're buying a Nissan Micra, you can walk away. When you're bargaining for your country, you can't. Tell me you know that. Because our country looks deranged, stupid, diminished, flaky, binging on self-harm, something no one voted for. A lab rat experiment by the crazies on the rest of us. No deal would mean busted trade, broken borders, bankrupt factories. No right for planes to fly, no right for trucks to move, 1,000 certainties gone. OK, so we might pick ourselves up and muddle through in the end. But we'd be a poorer, sadder, nastier place. An absurdity sniggered at by the world. So if Brexit's to happen, then we need to settle. That was always part of the claim by those who wanted to leave. Remember that we'd get good terms. Of course, they never told us what they would be. And now we know why. They didn't have a clue. Still, we've got to settle. Hold out and the EU won't fold. Why should they? The terms will get harder, the crisis deeper. So, Theresa, please don't think it clever to cross your arms and play strong. Talk, compromise, offer help. Meet halfway, defuse this bomb. Do what diplomacy can do best. A bad deal is better than no deal. Swallow your pride. A bad deal may be the best we can get.
I've been